Okay, I'm ready for another chapter of my story if you are. I get so nervous. So I'm just going to get ready for work. I'm going to do my makeup and I will talk and tell my story and see how far we get until I'm done. And I feel like I should start, at least in the beginning, I feel like I should start these beginning weeks with a disclaimer that, we're talking 1986. So I was young, I was super inexperienced. I never had a relationship before. And some of the things that I'm going to tell you are really bad. Really bad. But, that's how you learn. I kind of went off subject a little bit last week and just gave you some history of Steve. And so I'll pick back up with the story. And as always, if you see anything that I'm using as far as makeup, I do sell makeup and skincare and do hair. That is my business and how I support myself. So if you're interested in anything, just let me know. Steve and I had been talking on the phone every day, every night for hours, 2-3 hours, maybe even longer. We talked about everything, and I really liked talking to him. I just was sure that it wasn't really going to go anywhere else. He invited me to a wedding. He was the best man in his best friend's upcoming wedding and asked me to be his date. And I said, okay. He told me that they were Buddhist, and so it was going to be a Buddhist wedding. And I thought, okay, that sounds really interesting. I'm down for that. And while I was at work, my client, just in conversation, mentioned that one of her friends was getting married on the weekend and it was a Buddhist wedding. I'm like, really? I'm going to a Buddhist wedding. Turns out it was the same wedding. So I was really happy about that because I knew that Steve would be doing best man duties and I would be by myself. And now I was going to know somebody there, my client and her husband. They also were in the entertainment industry. So I guess it's not that surprising that they knew each other. But I love that 6 degrees of separation. So we went to the wedding and it was nice. It was a good time and we had fun. He invited me to his birthday party, which cracks me up because he hated celebrating his birthday for as long as I've known him, except for this one time. He was turning 25. So some of his friends decided that he needed to have a birthday party, and it was at a restaurant, and his mom was going to be there. He had told me how he and his mom didn't have a very close relationship, but it was his mom, so he was always trying. And he really believed that she was mad at him for following in his father's footsteps and working in the entertainment industry when she had asked him not to. Getting a little bit sweaty. I don't know why. Nervous, I guess. So I went with him to his birthday party as his date. Didn't know anybody there except for his friend who just got married. And he introduced me to his mom. His mom, I mentioned, was from England. And so she had her English accent. And we just, Steve introduced us. And then he left us. He went to go, somebody pulled him, in the other direction. And so I'm by myself with his mom. And so it was some kind of small talk. And she asked me where I lived. And I said, Covina. And she said, oh my, very GU. I didn't even know what that meant, like GU. And so I think I asked her, or she, I said, I'm not really sure what that means. And she said, geographically undesirable. And I thought, okay. And I just kind of excused myself, and I thought, wow, all right. And that was my first meeting with Steve's mom. So now we had been going on a few dates. We'd been talking on the phone, getting to know each other for probably about 6 weeks. And I'm going to show you something. I'm just going to take a quick time out. I'm not going to really talk a lot about makeup while I do this, but our eyeshadow sticks went live today. So that's what I'm going to be using, in case you're wondering what the heck I'm using. They're eyeshadow sticks. They're really nice. So we had been dating and talking about 6 weeks. And we were in person. I believe we were in person. I don't think this was on the phone. And he said he'd really been enjoying the time that we'd been spending together, and he felt like he was really falling for me, but he couldn't get a read on where my head was at. And I was like, okay, trying to process, like, what does that mean, falling for me? Like falling in love? And I was starting to hyperventilate. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's been 6 weeks. And it really, I went into panic mode. But I thought, okay, I'm going to have to, put my big girl pants on and actually have a conversation. I wasn't good at having conversations. I didn't really know how. But I said, wow. And I told him that I didn't know where my head was at either. And I really felt like, I said, are you dating other people right now? Because I think that you should. I don't know what I want. I don't know where my head is. And I would feel terrible if you missed out on the girl of your dreams while you were wasting your time waiting for me to come around. I totally hurt his feelings, I'm sure. But I was being honest. I said, please date other people. And he wasn't quite sure what to say, how to react. But he said, okay. And, things ended kind of awkwardly. And I thought, I'm going to go on vacation. So rather than deal with what may be happening, I booked a trip to Hawaii. I had some friends that I grew up with, went through high school with, well, even elementary school, junior high, high school, guys, all guys, that after we graduated high school, they moved to Hawaii. And I was still in touch with them. And they said there was an open invitation if I ever wanted to come visit. I thought, I'm going to Hawaii. And I booked a trip for, I'm not sure, 7-10 days. And I told Steve that I was leaving town. I had a cell phone. We had cell phones. We couldn't text back then, but there were cell phones. But I told him that, he probably wouldn't hear from me. And I left town. It was over Mother's Day. And so I was trying to call my mom to wish her a happy Mother's Day. And all of the circuits were busy. I didn't even know that was a thing. I couldn't understand why my call wouldn't go through. but I couldn't get through until the next day, and I felt really bad that I didn't reach her, but I didn't know that whole thing about the circuits being busy. So I talked to her the next day, apologized, wished her happy belated Mother's Day, which she hates. If you're ever belated with anything, you have a year to prepare. But in this case, I felt like I had an excuse. So she said, oh, that's okay. Steve called me and wished me happy Mother's Day. And I thought, he did? In fact, she said, he sent me flowers. And I thought, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And she was all, smitten. And I thought, wow, okay. Well, then I was confirming with her that she would be picking me up at the airport when I got back. And she said, oh, I talked to Steve about that. And he said that he was going to come pick you up. And I thought, well, I don't really want him to come pick me up. And she said, it's so far from here. It was LAX. So it was, almost an hour's drive. Everything was almost an hour's drive. And Steve said, oh, I live so much closer to the airport. Why don't you let me go? I'll save you the hassle, and I don't mind doing it at all. And I was like, oh my gosh. So he's going to drive 30 minutes. He's probably, halfway closer. 30 minutes to the airport to come get me. Drive an hour to take me home. And then drive an hour back to where he lived. And I was coming in at night, so this was going to be at night. And I thought, that just sounds like such an inconvenience. And I wasn't happy about it, but Mom said they made the plan. And I thought, gosh, okay. So he did. He picked me up from the airport and took me home. And it was fine. It just, So over the next couple of weeks, we still talked to each other. And I did go out on a few dates with other people. And I was hoping that he was too. I was working at the hair salon, and I've mentioned that I never really dated much, and I never had a boyfriend, any of those things. But all of a sudden now, I was getting noticed at the salon. I had a little crush on one of my clients, and he asked me to go out on a date, and I was super excited about it. And then another girl that I work with, one of her clients, she said, oh, whatever his name was asking about you and, wondered if he could get your number. And I thought, wow, this is kind of fun. So I did go out on some dates, but I found myself comparing everybody to Steve. And I'd be like, well, Steve would open the car door for me. Oh, Steve would open, the door to the restaurant. Oh, Steve wouldn't act like that. Steve is so much more funnier than this person. And I just found myself comparing. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of weird, but it's true. And I talked to my mom, especially like right after I got home from Hawaii, because she was wondering why I was being so weird about him picking me up. And I know she probably thinks I wasn't listening, although I was. And she was saying things like, he's such a nice guy. He's kind. He's respectful. He likes you. He's a hard worker. He's not an alcoholic. He's not a drug addict. He's not a gambler. She's like, what do you want? Like, what more could you want? And I thought, I don't know. I just want somebody that, is my type. I was so stuck on that he wasn't my type. When clearly, I had no idea what my type was. Or what I thought was my type wasn't. Or I would have had found somebody at some point. So I just had to, I just had to figure it out for myself. So here we are, just kind of picked up where we left off, still talking. Saw each other, a couple times. And then he told me about this friend of his, a girl who he had gone to, I think, junior high, high school. They'd been friends for several years. And she had a trip planned with her boyfriend and another couple. They were going to go on vacation, and she and her boyfriend, I don't know, it might not have been a boyfriend, but she and this guy had planned to go on this trip together, and he backed out, and it was the last minute, and she had already paid and couldn't get her money back. I don't know if she paid for the guy. All I know is she asked Steve if he would go with her. And so he was telling me, and that he felt really bad for her. Of course, she was crying and she was really upset about the whole thing. And I said, where's the trip? And he said, Hawaii. I'm like, oh my gosh, he had told me he'd never been to Hawaii. And we lived in California, so it's like, who's never been to Hawaii when you live in California? Because we used to go there, like people, I'm in Tennessee, people go to Florida. We used to go to Hawaii. It was just a really easy trip. So I said, go. You need to go. He's like, oh, I don't really want to. I don't want to take the time off work. I just kept saying, you need to go. You would have so much fun. Of course, I was, all high on Hawaii because I had just gotten back a few weeks ago, and I had such a good time. I can't believe, I think back now, I went by myself. And I really wanted to get out of here that bad, or out of where I was. But I went by myself, and I went parasailing and jet skiing, and I took a scuba lesson, and my friends had to work, so I was on my own. I was literally, I was by myself most of the time. We'd hang out in the evenings, but, I went out to eat by myself, and I did all the things by myself, which is crazy. And so now he had this opportunity to go with his friend and this other couple. And I don't think the whole trip was paid for, because that was one of his excuses too, was, well, it's really not my budget right now. I don't have the money to go on vacation. And I said, I'll loan you the money. I said, don't miss this opportunity. You have a chance to go do something you've never done, and go with your friend. You need to do this. And so he went. And I thought, after he left, I was kind of thinking, oh, what is this feeling that I'm having about him being on vacation with a girl? And anyways, like the first day, he called me. I didn't call him at all while I was gone. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And he told me what they had done all day. And then he said, everybody wanted to go down onto the beach and watch the sunset. And he said, but I just really wanted to call you. And I was like, oh, okay, call me tomorrow. And he's like, okay. He goes, or maybe I'll call you later tonight. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are these feelings? But anyway, so he called me every day. And I'm done with my makeup now, so I can't tell you how this part ends, except for my setting spray. And we'll pick this up again next week. Bye.